Okay, next is 35.2, defenses against infection. So with pathogens all around us, it might seem amazing that most of us aren't sick most of the time. Why are we usually free from infections, and why do we usually recover from pathogens that do infect us? So one reason is that our bodies have an incredibly powerful and adaptable series of defenses that protect us against a wide range of pathogens. So what are the body's nonspecific defenses against pathogens? Well, nonspecific defenses include the skin, tears or other secretions, the inflammatory responses, interferons, and fever. So the body's first defense against pathogen is a combination of physical and chemical barriers. These barriers include the skin, tears, and other secretions, the inflammatory response, interferons, and fever. These barriers are called non-specific defenses because they act as a wide range against a wide range of pathogens. The most widespread non-specific defense is the skin, and very few pathogens can penetrate the layers of dead cells that form the skin's surface. Other non-specific defenses protect parts of the body that are not covered by the skin, such as the mouth, nose, and eyes. Saliva, mucus, and tears contain lysozyme, and it's an enzyme that breaks down the bacterial cell walls. Mucus in your nose and throat traps pathogens. Then cilia push the mucus trap pathogens away from your lungs. Stomach secretions destroy many pathogens that are swallowed. So if pathogens make it into the body through a cut in the skin, for example, the body's second line of defense swings into action. So these mechanisms include inflammatory response, the action of interferons, and fever. So the inflammation response causes infected areas to become red, painful, or inflamed. The response begins when pathogens stimulate cells called mast cells to release chemicals known as histamines. And the histamines increase the flow of blood and fluids to the affected area. The fluid leaking from the expanded blood vessels causes the area to swell. White blood cells move from blood vessels into the infected tissues, and many of these white blood cells are phagocytes, which engulf and destroy bacteria. All this activity around a wound may cause a local rise in temperature, and that's why a wound area sometimes will feel warm. Many viruses infect body cells, which contain host cells that produce proteins that inhibit synthesis of viral proteins and help block viral replication. So scientists name these protons interferon because they interfere with the viral growth. And interferons slow down the progress of infection, and they buy time for the specific immune defenses to respond. So fever. The immune system also releases chemicals that increase the body's temperature, producing a fever. The increased body temperature may slow down or stop the growth of some pathogen. Higher body temperature also speeds up several parts of the immune response. So what is the function of the immune system's specific defenses? Well, the immune system's specific defenses distinguishes between self and other, and they inactivate or kill any foreign substance or cell that enters into the body. A healthy immune system recognizes all cells and proteins that belong in the body, and it treats those cells and proteins as self. And the ability to recognize self is essential because the immune system controls powerful cellular and chemical weapons that could cause problems if turned against the body's own cells. The immune system recognizes foreign organisms and molecules as other or non-self. And once the immune system recognizes invaders as others, it uses cellular and chemical weapons to attack them. After encountering a specific invader, the immune system remembers the invader enabling it a more rapid and effective response if that same pathogen or one that's similar to it attacks again. This specific recognition, response, and memory are called immune response. So specific immune defenses are triggered by molecules called antigens. And antigen is any foreign substance that can stimulate an immune response. And typically, antigens are located on the outer surfaces of bacteria, viruses, and parasites. The immune system responds to antigens by increasing the number of cells that either attack the invaders directly or that produce proteins called antibodies. So the main role of antibodies is to tag antigens for destruction by immune cells. Antibodies may be attached to particular immune cells, or they may be free-floating in the plasma. The body makes up to 10 billion different antibodies, and the shape of each type of antibody allows it to attach to one specific antigen. So the main working cells of the immune response are your B lymphocytes, which we just call those the B cells, and your T lymphocytes, which we call those the T cells. The B cells are produced in and mature in red bone marrow. The B cells have embedded antibodies and discover antigens in body fluids. The T cells are produced in the bone marrow, but mature in the thymus and the endocrine gland. The T cells must be presented with an antigen by infected body cells or immune cells that have encountered antigens. And each B cell and T cell is capable of recognizing one specific antigen. A person's genes determine the particular B and T cells that are produced. And when mature, both types of cells travel to lymph nodes and the spleen where they will encounter antigens. So what are the body's specific defenses against pathogens? The specific immune response has two main styles of action: humoral immunity and cell-mediated immunity. The immune system that defends against antigen and body fluids, such as the blood and lymph, is called the humoral immunity. B cells play a major role in humoral immunity. And when a pathogen invades the body, its antigens are recognized by antibodies on the new surfaces of existing B cells. And antibodies are the main weapons of the humoral immune system. An antibody is shaped like the letter Y and has two identical antigen binding sites. The shapes of the binding sites enable an antibody to recognize a specific antigen with a complementary shape. And when an antigen binds to an antibody carried by B cells, T cells stimulate the B cell to grow and divide rapidly. The growth and division produces many B cells of two types: plasma cells and memory B cells. Plasma cells produce and release antibodies that are carried through the bloodstream. These antibodies recognize and bind free-floating antigens or to antigens on the surface of pathogens. And when antibodies bind to antigens, they signal other parts of the immune system to attack and destroy the invaders. So some types of antibodies can disable invaders until they are destroyed. And a healthy adult can produce about 10 billion different types of antibodies, each of which can bind to different types of antigen. This antibody diversity enables the immune system to respond to virtually any kind of other that enters the body. So plasma cells die after an infection is gone, but some B cells that recognize a particular antigen remain alive. These cells, called memory B cells, react quickly if the same pathogen enters the body. Memory B cells rapidly produce new plasma cells to battle a returning pathogen, and this secondary response occurs much faster than the first response to a pathogen. Immune memory helps to provide long-term immunity to certain diseases and is the reason that vaccinations work. Another part of the immune response, which depends on the action of macrophages and several types of T cells is called cell-mediated immunity. And this part of the immune system defends the body against viruses, fungi, and single-celled pathogens. T cells also protect the body from its own cells when they become cancerous. So when a cell is infected by a pathogen or when a phagocyte consumes a pathogen, the cell displays a portion of the antigen on the outer surface of its membrane. This membrane attachment is a signal to circulating T cells called helper T cells. And activated helper T cells divide into more helper T cells, which go on to activate B cells, activate cytotoxic T cells, and produce memory cells. So cytotoxic T cells hunt down the body cells infected with a particular antigen and kill the cells. They kill infected cells by puncturing their membranes or initiating apoptosis, that is simply the word for programmed cell death. Memory helper T cells enable the immune system to respond quickly if the same pathogen enters the body again. And another type of T cell called suppressor T cells inhibits the immune response once an infection is under control. So they may also be involved in preventing autoimmune diseases. Another cytotoxic T cells that are helpful in the immune system, they make the acceptance of organ transplants difficult. So when an organ is transplanted from one person to another, the normal response of the recipient's immune system would be to recognize it as non-self. The T cells and proteins would damage and destroy the transplanted organ in a process known as rejection. So to prevent the organ rejection, doctors search for donors whose cell markers are nearly identical to the cell markers of the recipient. And organ recipients must take drugs, usually for the rest of their lives, to suppress the cell-mediated immune response.